Hi everyone, Shannan here, one of the co-founders at Rosterfy. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. The purpose of this session is simply to go through the health check and sort of get your feedback as well, and sort of for us to present some of the learnings we've had from the process. So I would love input as we progress through. If you can put comments in chat through as we're going, but if not, I'd love a follow-up in some emails afterwards as well. So we've only got 30 minutes today, so I might crack straight into it in terms of getting to the details. So for those that we haven't met yet, briefly, Rosterfy, proudly Australian born and bred. We've done over 160 million hours of volunteering through our platform around the world across 70 odd countries. So truly having a global impact. But here are some very local brands and non-profits and volunteer programs that we work with and support here in Australia, just as a good reference point, I suppose, a lot of which have done this health check and contributed to the learnings that we have for today. So again, the purpose for today is around going through the results of the health check. What are some things that we can learn or pick out from? And then the second half of today's session will be to help move this forward, get your insights and present some of, I guess, how we want to take this forward to make sure that it's really valuable for everyone that's done it and they can go back to their organizations with something that's really meaningful. All right, so for those that haven't potentially had the chance to do it yet, feel free to scan this QR that's on the screen there. So I might just pause here for 10 seconds, allow you with your phone to scan that if you haven't been able to do it yet. You're welcome to jump through it and complete this. I'm unsure if it's 5 minutes, if people have taken longer, but hopefully it's roughly around that. Okay, so that's what the health check is there. All right, so let's jump into a bit of the data. So we've sort of aggregated all of this across I think we've had 160 odd responses now, and this is just for Australia only. Here's the general gist of where everyone's been landing in terms of the outcome. So we have the 5 levels in which you could finish once you've completed the survey. And we have, I think, some interesting things there is that the main grouping of us is around the level 3 consistent operator. So I think a lot of us are doing enough for the program and doing quite a good job. And we'll get into detail, breaking those details out a bit more as we progress through. So 44% in that consistent operator, 34% in level 2, sort of emerging, but seeing that there's still work to be done. And I would love some feedback as we go to see maybe that's just because of capacity in the organization or funding and whatever it might be. And then there's only 10% of us that are really sort of flying with the program in terms of having full support and automations running a lot of the work that previously was very manual. So there's only 10%, which is a small group. One thing here, hopefully helpful, is recognizing that not every organization has the funds and the support needed to invest in their volunteer program like everybody else does, I suppose, or a small group do have. So we wanted to break this out with a best estimate of revenue of organization, okay? And ultimately, what was the average score by groupings of revenue for the organization that they all scored? And I think the interesting thing we found here is that everyone's pretty similar, with the overwhelming number here of 65 being the score, between a 20 mil to 100 mil revenue size organization. I guess is highlighting to me to say that those larger organizations with more funds to invest in programs, systems, teams to run this are able to see better outcomes in their volunteer programs, which go against the National Australia Volunteering standards. And what's interesting to me is that the significantly large one, over 100 million in revenue, hasn't scored that well in particular as well. And I guess it's sort of, it just shows that not everyone is in the shape or size to be able to do this or prioritize that volunteer program to be scoring extremely highly. We wanted to break this out by sector as well. And so we see there education is leading the charge there. And I suppose on my reflection, looking at that, you probably look at a lot of compliance needs for education. And I guess really, well, they're well funded, importantly. They have teams typically that are assigned to this work solely, and they will have an IT function behind the scenes that would drive procurement and making sure that the teams are able to make the most of their volunteer program. So in education, being at a much higher average, I thought was an interesting takeaway from this. With the arts, we don't have I think we do have a small number there. Yeah, so we have 3 in education and 6 from arts. They're sort of the bookends, I suppose, of what this looks like, and where you guys sit in the middle there as well. Okay. So Taddy, I'm not able to see questions or comments as we progress through. I suppose that's just how it's going to need to be here. All right. Now, where organizations rank category by category. So we now break this out to say, where are people either struggling? So how you assess this table here is by seeing that level 1 is the area that we say we've got the most problems, basically. That's the way we're not advancing as we probably should be. And then level 5 is to say we're doing a really good job and we've got this under control. So I thought an interesting assessment here is governance. Everyone that responded, as a general rule, is doing exceptionally well with that governance. And to put it simply, that's around how our organization, I guess, invests in their volunteer program. You have the board on side, you've got it set up correctly as your organization. So I think that's from a governance standpoint. But close to half of us are really saying that we're at the most basic level for rostering perspective. So that will be an interesting one we're going to dive into next. Okay, and hopefully we can send this through if we'd like afterwards. It'd be interesting for you to cross-check how you've scored against these specific points as well, and by vertical, like by industry. Okay. All right. I'll keep moving through here. So as we progress, we go by industry, so non-profit, government, aged care, healthcare, other. How are we scoring? And I thought an interesting thing out of this was to say most of us, as the data have shown, we're all scoring about the 3 mark, right? So that's about the average that we see across all. Aged care we see has probably a large number, proportion-wise, of lower scores, I suppose, in aged care. And I'd love some feedback from those organizations as to why. But it's also not saying they're doing a bad job. Maybe it's just around the capacity of the organization, or also maybe one thing I want to reflect on about this scoring, maybe we're scoring around things that aren't even feasible for you to handle or to do more with. And so I'd love some feedback from those organizations, especially out of aged care, if you wouldn't mind, to say, well, here's why we scored a 2. And you know what? 2's our capacity anyway, and we're happy with 2. And that's fantastic if that's the case. So I'd love some feedback from those that have completed this to see your feedback with that, okay? All right. And we break it down here in arts, corporate, food bank, education, sport, nothing grabbing us immensely there. All right, so I've got a few guests that will join us in a little bit, just for little snippets and to ask some questions so that we're hearing it from other volunteer leaders. But I guess out of what we've just assessed at the top there was the 3 biggest consistent areas of improvement that we could ask for was around rostering. It was around volunteer autonomy. So how do we reduce all the manual workload involved? And then number 3 is around onboarding. So they're the 3 areas that we want to dive into a bit more detail with. All right, so if we talk about streamlining rostering processes, out of 160 submissions, the average score, well, the most score was 2 out of 5. So I think this one here is showing that the work involved with the rostering component, it seems to be the most draining sometimes in a lot of these programs. And I would love your feedback as to why that might be the case, or the areas that you could improve on. And I know that compliance and risk and also combined with a large manual workload can be the driver for this, but I'd love your feedback as we progress through this, and even in an email afterwards, to give me some detail as to why, or what's causing that in your organization. The next one is around fostering volunteer autonomy. Taddy, if Mark's there, I'm not sure, from Curtin. I'm not sure if he's been able to join us, but maybe he's not, but that's okay. What we'll go into data insights here. So fostering volunteer autonomy, Anna, Are you there and able to join us and say hello?
Yes, I
How are you? We've got Anna from Very Special Kids joining us here. Um, Anna, thank you for joining us briefly here.
am. Welcome.
Maybe before we get into this, was there anything in particular of note that grabbed you from what we discussed at the start of today's panel? Was there a note where you reflected on your score versus others or in your industry? What was something that grabbed you?
I think it was a little bit expected from my end around the various not-for-profits that I've worked for in the past. It
Yep.
did surprise me that education was so high. However, again, they're very well resourced
Yeah.
with good IT in the background. And I think aged care surprised me a little bit too with the changes that have come in with aged care volunteering. To see that strength surprised me a
Yeah.
little bit, and I championed that.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, okay. All right. And then I guess as we have a look at the challenge here, streamlining rostering, because I know you've been around volunteer management for a long time, Anna. So
Yeah.
when you see 2 out of 5 there, what's your reflection? Because I know, again, this isn't a you're doing a bad job. Sometimes you're a 2 because the way your organization works, it needs to be a 2 by the scoring. What's your reflection when you look at that?
The first thing I think about is the workforce that we're working with. We've got a very transient
Yep.
workforce that are not held by finance, so that can be a little bit difficult. Volunteer cohorts, we have a lot of retirees that tend to travel during winter. We have a lot of uni students that have differing timetables from term to term, placement with study, and we
Yep.
have our cohort of people that still work full time, that work arrangements can change. So we've operated often on an opt-in type of rostering system. We're now
Yep.
trying to move that a little bit to an opt-out so we have more stability. But it doesn't surprise me to see that as a a 2 point, nearly 2.1 out of
Yep.
5, because of the workforce that we're working with.
Yep. For sure. I think it's one I reflect on when I think of this is Golf Australia, and we've worked with them for a number of years. And I think the simplest summary was the tail wagging the dog at the start versus them trying to get more control. I think was the simple way that we always talked about it, in
Mm,
terms of they were always at the mercy of whenever the volunteer, and they very much treated it like, well, we're lucky to have you, and everyone rightly so. I understand this, but we're lucky to have you, and so you sort of tell us when you can help, and we'll be reactive to that compared to proactive and in control of how that looks, and almost making their volunteers earn their spot a little bit more so than and with that the attendance rates also increased. I suppose that transition from being reactive to proactive is probably my simple assessment here, where it's very hard life for you if you're being reactive all the time, and it feels like you're starting to move in that journey, it sounds like, Anna.
Oh, absolutely. And I think you've got it spot on. We also know that being reactive creates a lot of work. We're being a little bit more proactive,
Yeah.
streamlines things a little bit, but it's also creating that sense of community for that proactive environment to be in place, which is something that we're really
Yeah.
concentrating on at the moment as well.
And that's not easy, is it, Anna? Like,
No, it's not.
especially when it's been that way for such a long time, and there's only often one of you in as an example, in different organizations. Can I ask, maybe for the audience, how do you go about trying to make that change, Anna? What do you think?
It's the narrative that we've been putting together um, around increasing the understanding of the value of those shifts and the
Yeah.
value of being a part of our organisation, the extended learning programs that we're putting in place that not only foster the work they do for us here at Very Special Kids, but also that they can take into their personal lives and their work lives as well.
Yeah.
So we've got a sort of a multi-channeled approach at trying to create that community where they want to be a little bit more a part of and want to be a little bit more engaged with, and moving to that proactive phase, and that opt out of our rosters more than opt in means that life just doesn't get in the way and it remains a high value for them to offer
Hmm.
their time to our organisation.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you. All right. And I think this one here is around that autonomy. So I
Mm.
guess my reflection on this, and having sort of managed a lot of rosters and students and stuff before we started Rosterfy, I reflect on all the Friday nights, the Saturday early mornings when something would change because the volunteers and the workforce couldn't actually do anything themselves. It would just always came to the top of the pyramid to say, here's my problem, you need to solve it, and no one else could. And that's a very stressful place to be in, and it makes you lose sleep. And I'm sure you can resonate with that sometimes, and lots of people listening in can, and hence the score perhaps. But it's not as easy as just saying, here you go, volunteers, run your own show as well. What do you reflect on when you see the idea of creating more autonomy in your volunteer program to reduce that pyramid of hierarchy of problems just going to one central point, Anna?
Look, I think it's improved the communication a little bit. You know, with having volunteers having a little bit more autonomy and selecting shifts that they want to be a part of and jumping out of shifts that where commitments clash, they're getting a lot more communication around, thanks for jumping into this shift, or we understand you've had to pull out of this shift, thanks for letting us know, we can get somebody else involved.
Yep.
And it's just having that streamlined communication that adds value. And volunteers then, by doing it a little bit more autonomously, don't feel guilty about pulling out of a shift and feeling bad about contacting us and saying, oh no, I've got to do this again, something's come up. And so it really does help with effective communication and allowing volunteers to say, actually, I've had to pull out a shift, but look at that, I can jump in there and there. And we're finding for every shift that a volunteer has to withdraw from, they're jumping into at least one or two more.
For sure. Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. And another one I reflect on is Pont3 Sydney Marathon. If you think about it, especially in this mass participation and major event world, when you're dealing with thousands of, typically they don't, it's the opposite scenario sometimes, Anna, that they have the luxury sometimes of having more applications than shifts to fulfill, right? But with that comes the need to automate a lot of the processes of screening, because you don't have the human hours in a day to go through all of the applications and filter to get to that spot. But what they have sort of communicated to us is around the automation power and empowering those volunteers to automate through their journeys, I think is a really important one that they could not do. They would sort of need 4 times the amount of staff without being able to empower volunteers to run their own show. I think that's an interesting point. And then secondly, it's around that volunteer experience being very positive, because the volunteers are in more control now. They're less in the dark sometimes when they're waiting for a response from someone who has all the right intention, but sometimes it can be slow to get back to them, or it takes a little while, which can cause frustration. And I think this ties in nicely to the last point, Anna, we'll talk about, which is around accelerating the onboarding funnel. Because I think this is, again, this was a pretty low score across the board, where a lot of organizations' feedback to us was just saying we're just sort of caught with the limited resource that we have. And sometimes organizations are taking 2, 3, 4 months to onboard volunteers. And it's really hard in this day and age when everything's so instant in every other facet of their life to think that that should be the experience volunteers have. When you compare to the fundraising side of a lot of these nonprofits, everything's pretty instantaneous realistically. And that's the direction I think a lot of people are wanting to lead to. Anna, you've sort of been on a bit of this journey yourself over the last 12 months. You did a fantastic webinar last week, which I recommend that you listen into. But this has been a big focus for you, Anna. Can you just sort of talk about where you were and where you're trying to head to and some of the learnings that you've had?
Oh, absolutely. Previous to digitising our onboarding journey, we were doing group volunteer journeys. So 4 times a year, people could register their interest to volunteer, and they would just have to wait until we were ready to do a recruitment and onboarding journey. It meant that we lost a lot of interest very, very quickly. People were looking at wanting to start quite quickly. We have moved to an online rolling recruitment phase now, so people can onboard as soon as their interest is piqued, and we can get them to the point of, we have a progressive training system, so they can get to the first stop in our training system and be involved and engaged with the organisation, and then move into roles a little bit further down the track when we have in-person training for our family immersion roles. That has changed people's journeys from 3 months down to, if they're really quick, a matter of a week to 10 days, which is startling. Not only is it startling.
How long, Anna? Sorry, say that again. From how long was it before?
3 months. It could be 3 months.
So it was 3 months, and it's now how long?
A week to 10 days, depending on how quickly the volunteer moves through the journey.
Yeah, I mean, that's an awesome outcome for the business, and like all very positive, but I'm sure there's also some learning with that too, Anna, of being like, oh my God, we've got too many people sort of ready and wanting to do stuff. Can we reflect on, is there some challenges perhaps that also brings, Anna, like you need to have more shifts available then and there? Like, what's some learnings you've had from that?
Well, because we've gone from a model of group volunteering to a rolling recruitment where people can register their interest when they want to, we've got a bit of a wait list that we're getting through. So we've had to stage that out cautiously so that we are not overwhelmed with work. What we did find when we were doing group volunteering is that that's all we concentrated on for a couple of months, and our time to support our broader volunteer cohort was reduced. What this allows us to do in a moderated way is make sure that our time is evenly distributed across supporting our volunteer community and onboarding our new recruits. So it's made a huge difference to our workflow. Some of the learnings: just moderate how many people you're taking on at once. Volunteer interviews, running police checks, maintaining compliance can take up a lot of time. But we have also organised all those volunteer interviews, the time slots that suit our time frame, not the time slots that are compacted into short spaces of time.
Yeah.
So that's where sometimes those manual processes still take a minute.
Yeah. And Anna, that's I guess the tail wagging the dog sort of referenceability earlier, where you're trying to control that more in the structure that you have. But but the balance, right? Probably rewind 12 months ago, you were trying to control it with those 4 slots a year, saying, here's the way that our organization works. It doesn't work the way that you as a volunteer want it to work. And that can be challenging, isn't it? Even though if that's the case, and we've had just 2 quick questions that have come through. So one is around that their set schedule for delivery, meaning that that's sort of the way that they have to run their program. It's, and that's fair enough. Like some programs, they just have to run these ways, and that's okay. So it's hard to then reflect if you're getting a bad score. I appreciate that's a hard pill to swallow, when I would suggest perhaps the scoring needs to be adjusted, or it needs to have a reflection of that, because your program is different and can't be run the same as others. So that's certainly a reflection from our side about how do we get feedback to make sure that these are representing the great work your program does that is personalized to your organization. Anna, what do you think when you hear that?
Well, I challenged that a little bit, because that's how we were. We had our 4 set programs. And when we decided to automate our processes, the company that we use challenged us on that. And they sort of, how about that? They sort of said, does your first level of training have to be in person? Can that not be online? And we thought about that. We thought, you know what, you're right. That first level of training can be online. So our first tier of volunteering can now go through the entire onboarding and their first lot of training, and then they're engaged with the organisation, can come in, be a part of it whilst they wait for our next level of training that may only be run 4 or 5 times a year, but they're engaged, they're involved, they're learning about the organisation, they become a champion for the organisation, and get given opportunities that hold them at a period of time where they're still engaging. So if there is some creative thinking that might be able to work around that, it's certainly changed the premise of how we manage our onboarding journey.
Yep. Yeah, interesting. Thank you for that perspective, Anna. And it's all food for thought, isn't it? It's always good to learn from others, hence why it's been fantastic to have you here, Anna. So thank you for your time to join me. So Anna, thank you for that. Taddy, I'm not sure if Renee from Foodbank Victoria is around and able to jump in just quickly. I might just have some reflection from Renee as well, if that's possible. I'm not sure. Let's see how we go there. Potential. Here we go. Renee's just joining us.
I think I'm here.
Yeah, I got you. How are you, Renee? Good to see you.
Good. How are you, Shannan?
Very well, thank you. Very well. Well, we'll jump to you in a second. What I wanted to touch on here, last point for me really was around that. Well, a common trend that we saw was that when a CEO did the report, in the same organization as a volunteer leader, the CEO's responses often scored them much higher than what the volunteer leader did. And so I just thought I would put that almost a challenge out to the audience to say, please go and take this to your CEO and see how they score themselves or the program versus yours. And it might open up a discussion about the realities or areas that you find there are room for improvement compared to perhaps what the execs might see. I just thought I would share that, being like that was a common trend that we saw. So please use that for however you will. Renee, thank you for joining us. I'm conscious we've only got a couple of minutes, so thank you for sort of sticking around there. I wanted to get your reflections on today. Was there anything that grabbed you or some learnings that you had from that experience today and what we saw, Renee?
Yeah, and I think hearing Anna, I couldn't jump
Yep.
on last week, sort of very similar things to us.
Sure.
And obviously we're at a different stage at the moment where we're sort of redefining things, and we're looking at bringing two sites together. So we've got some challenges there that we've now got to work through. So it's making us look at everything again from the ground upwards. And so using the tool as well, it was a few weeks ago I did mine because I did it before the national conference. It was interesting to sort of reflect on, okay, where are our gaps and what do we need to look at, and well, how can we do things differently? And in this new phase that we're going into, well, how can we set us up for success and combine things as well? So a lot of our big issues around the compliance and ensuring all the volunteers are up to date on what they need to be up to date for on different roles and stuff as well. So sort of that's a big challenge for us that we're working through at the minute.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Okay. Well, that's helpful. Thank you, Renee. So what a big thing for us, right, is that we came up with this concept because we're like, what we speak to clients and prospects every day that are saying, we think we're going okay, but we're not really sure, right? So the objective of this was to say, how do we get a shared knowledge base and where you can compare yourself with others in the same sort of industry or the same sort of volunteer program size. So one of the questions was, how do we compare against others with, for example, 100 volunteers, 500 volunteers, 1,000 volunteers? That's a very good question, and that's something that we'll work on. But I guess I wanted to present and show Renee some of the thinking that we had of, and we've put a bit of work in here. Our team's put a lot of work in to show sort of some outputs and like what are some takeaways. Like I know the report you got was probably a good foundation of that, but we're wanting to evolve on that. Okay. And so here's a sample, right, of one of these pages we're wanting to create is to say, okay, if you were a level 3 and want to get to a level 5, here's some examples of people that have done that. So how do we learn from others? Okay. My challenge to this is that we've probably got a very sort of Rosterfy lens to this. Okay. And so I really would encourage, and I'd love people's feedback to say, if there were broader things outside of systems and automations in the program, yes, we've tried our very best to involve the national standards in these things. But what I would love to get feedback from people is to say, for example, Renee, like, you know this stuff better than I do. What are some fantastic things you can do with the time that this might free up for you? For example, spending more time with your volunteers, going out to present to universities to grow your program. I would love to have a section in these reports that gives you some really practical takeaways for an organization like yours. Here's what Foodbank Victoria are doing and what they are and what you could learn from. Okay, so that's a really big thing I want from this. And I really encourage people to provide any feedback, please, good, bad, ugly. We want it all about how we can make sure this is super useful moving forward. Renee, when you see these sort of reports or the report you got, was there something that was really helpful for you or a reference of a different charity that you saw that you thought that's really cool?
Yeah, I think a few of the different ones, especially with Orange
Sky.
Yes, Orange Sky, that's the ones.
Yep.
There's many colours in the not-for-profit world. And sort of looking at their model and what they do and sort of reflecting, is there something we can do to sort of have a wraparound service with that as well? If we've now got time to invest in developing programs and finding the opportunities for our volunteers out there as well, are there areas that we can be sharing and joining and linking services and stuff as well? And I think one thing for us as well is looking internally too and challenging ourselves on the way we do things and going, hang on a minute, we can automate more things and push things out to the volunteer and not have as much control, whereas we're so used to having so much control over the programs. It's like, wait, take a step back and let's challenge ourselves on those ways of thinking as well.
Right. I think that's awesome, Renee. I think that's the whole, if you take one thing out of it like that you go, boom, like let's try that, or let's learn from someone else. That's the whole objective here. And so what I'm sharing my screen with here is hopefully like a good takeaway. Like, hey, if you're struggling for volunteers to understand what are the roles in your business they could play, check out how guide dogs do it and check out how they manage their program and can publish their opportunities. Sort of the inverse of recruitment. They don't make volunteers go through the 3 months onboarding before telling them what they can do. They start it from the very start. And so maybe that's one fantastic takeaway you can have. So look, that's the objective here, is to be helpful, and hopefully I would love your feedback. Please send us an email, whatever it is, to tell us what we can improve on, or if the score didn't resonate with you, please tell us and we can work on that. So that was the intention for today. Anna, Renee, thank you for joining me. Renee, any last points from you?
Keep talking to everyone. I think that's the main thing. Every organization's so different. We're a common goal, but we all do have similar issues and similar challenges. So it's good to hear that others are in the same boat, I guess.
For sure. Absolutely. Well, that's right, Renee, isn't it? It's not easy, and it's good to bounce off and learn from others that are going through the same thing. And the scores represent that. A lot of organizations are saying we're getting by, but we're not flying. I think that's just my simple takeaway, Renee, from this. And so if you can learn from someone that is flying or doing something really cool that you could take away, then fantastic, do that. And all the best. So Renee, thanks again. And everyone, we're at time now, 12:30. We've gone a couple of minutes over time. So thanks for sticking around. Hopefully that was helpful for everyone.
Thanks, Shannan.
Thanks, Renee. Good on you. Talk to you later.
See ya.
Yeah, bye-bye. Bye.